The flash of cameras had never unnerved Mahar before. She had stood at the center of countless fashion weeks, her creations gracing magazine covers, her name whispered with admiration in elite circles. But tonight, she stood in the shadows, her once bright world crumbling around her. Meher Khan, a visionary fashion designer known for her minimalist yet soul-stirring designs, had built an empire alongside her husband, Shan Mirza. What the world didn't know was that behind the curated, Instagram-perfect life, her heart had been quietly breaking for months. Shan, handsome, influential, ruthless in business, was the face of their brand, while Mahar was the soul. But power had twisted his love into entitlement. He began spending more time with a rising model Alizea barely out of her early 20s. Mahar saw the signs: missed calls, cancelled dinners, perfume that wasn't hers. But denial is a cozy poison. Until one night, backstage at a fashion gala, she caught them, lips locked, laughing, careless. 2 weeks later, on the eve of Paris Fashion Week, Shan served her divorce papers. The betrayal wasn't private. At a pre-Fashion Week cocktail party flooded with press, he stood confidently beside Alizé. When a reporter asked about Miha's absence, smirked. She was good once, he said casually, sipping his drink. But people evolve, some become legends, others, well, others are forgettable. Laughter echoed, cameras clicked, and Mahar, watching from a side screen, felt her breath leave her. Her heart shattered in silence. She didn't scream, didn't confront, she simply vanished. No interviews, no social media statements. 1 week after the divorce announcement, her official website went dark, her studio shut down overnight. Friends received returned gifts and goodbye letters. In the months that followed, gossip columns speculated, burnout, rehab, nervous breakdown, but no one knew the truth. Mahar had disappeared, not because she was broken, but because something inside her had ignited. The betrayal didn't destroy her, it peeled back the illusion. She had been more than Shan's shadow. She had been the light. And now, that light was ready to return. This time, it would blind the ones who underestimated her. The fall was public, but her rise would be legendary. The air in the small hill town of Erenia was cold, clean, and untouched by headlines. Tucked between cedar trees and misty cliffs, it offered something Mahar hadn't felt in years: silence. Real, uninterrupted silence. Not the kind that followed heartbreak or humiliation, but the silence that allowed her to breathe again. She had rented a modest cottage on the edge of the town. No internet, no press, no mirrors framed in gold. The only thing she kept was a worn leather-bound sketchbook, one she hadn't dared touch since the night she disappeared. Each morning began with tea by the window, watching the fog roll in. Locals recognized her only as Miss Mahar, the quiet woman who bought fresh fabric scraps from the tailor and painted alone in the woods. It was a far cry from the fashion houses of Milan and Paris, but in the whisper of pine needles and the hum of distant river streams, her soul had begun to heal. But healing was not linear. Some nights, she would wake gasping from nightmares, Shan's voice mocking her, Alizé laughing, cameras flashing as her name faded. Other nights she would sit by the fireplace, running her fingers across old sketches, each page a reminder of how much of herself she had given away. Shan had never drawn a single silhouette. The world believed the Mirza Muse collections were his brainchild, but it was Mahar who bled for them. From hand-stitching rare embroidery to conceptualizing themes inspired by forgotten Eastern architecture, her work had been plagiarized under the guise of partnership, and every time he smiled at a red carpet, it was her soul he was wearing. One rainy afternoon, when thunder shook the valley, something shifted. Mahar found herself picking up charcoal and sketching again. Not for approval, not for critics, for herself. Weeks passed, and her quiet studio filled with pieces raw, haunting, beautiful. Inspired by the natural textures of Erenia, her new designs had an emotional edge, something both ancient and modern. Still, she kept them hidden, until fate intervened. The town was preparing for a local charity fashion showcase to raise funds for an orphanage. The event's organizer, a warm-hearted woman named Nida, had caught a glimpse of Mahar's designs by accident and pleaded with her to participate. After much convincing and the promise of anonymity, Mahar agreed to submit 5 pieces under the pseudonym Kaya. The night of the event, Mahar stayed far from the crowd, watching from behind curtains as models strutted down a makeshift runway draped in fairy lights. Her dresses stood out: earthy silks, asymmetrical cuts, hand-painted textures that looked like frozen emotions in fabric. But when the show ended, there was a small buzz, whispers, curiosity. But what caught everyone off guard was what happened afterward. well-dressed gentleman in a sharp grey coat quietly approached Nida and wrote a check that covered all 5 pieces. No questions, no bargaining. He left only a name on the receipt. ZM. No one had seen his face clearly, but the staff remembered one thing: his eyes, sharp, observant, intense. Back at her cottage, Meha stared at the receipt in disbelief. Her designs, forgotten for years, were now in the hands of a man she had never met. She didn't know it yet, but ZM wasn't just a buyer. He was a storm heading her way. And storms, she had learned, always changed everything. Meha hadn't expected to see him again. It was late afternoon when a matte black SUV pulled up outside her hill cottage. The quiet crunch of tires on gravel startled her from her sketching. She peeked out the window cautiously, expecting a lost tourist or maybe someone from the charity event. But what stepped out was a man who didn't belong in a sleepy town like Arena. He wore a charcoal trench coat, his posture elegant but unassuming. Clean-shaven, sharp-featured and tall, the stranger radiated the kind of quiet power that made people instinctively take a step back or lean in. A knock followed. Mahar opened the door halfway, unsure. He gave a small smile. "Miss Mahar Khan?" She stiffened. "Who's asking?" "I'm Zion Malik," he said simply. "I bought your designs at the charity show." Her breath caught. Zion Malik, the name wasn't just known, it was legendary. A tech billionaire turned creative investor, Zion was infamous for identifying hidden talent and transforming them into global icons. He backed musicians, sculptors, even unknown architects. What he invested in wasn't just business, it was vision. "I didn't expect you," she murmured. He smiled slightly, sensing her discomfort. "May I come in? Just to talk?" Reluctantly, she nodded and sighed. Zion took slow, thoughtful steps around her studio space. His eyes scanned her pinned fabrics, brush-streaked boards, and delicate pieces she was still shaping. "I knew it," he said softly. "These weren't beginner's luck. You're an artist who's been caged." Mahara folded her arms. "I don't design anymore. Yet here you are, doing it better than half of Paris." She stared at him, silent. Cayan continued, "I don't fund people for profit. I support creators who have something to say. Your work speaks. Pain, strength, grace. I want to offer you an atelier in Paris. No contracts, no PR circuits, just space, resources, and time. On your terms." She blinked. "Why me?" "Because you've been erased, and I don't believe in forgetting brilliance." The words touched something raw, but old wounds don't heal easily. "I left that world," Mahar said firmly. "I'm not interested in fashion politics or limelight anymore. I just create to breathe." He didn't push. Instead, he reached into his coat and placed a card on the table. "If you ever want the world to breathe with you again, call me." Then he left. Days passed. Mahar tried to forget the encounter, but his words echoed louder with each sunrise. And then she made the mistake of watching Shan's new show, streaming live from Milan. The runway displayed a collection titled Femininity, a grotesque mockery of her signature silhouettes. Her old designs, twisted and exaggerated, strutted across the catwalk, while Shan smiled arrogantly at the end, holding Alizé's hand. Worse, a fashion blogger narrated, clearly, Shan Mirza's moving beyond dated aesthetics, finally evolving. After his ex-wife's disappearance, the audience laughed. Meha's chest tightened. Her hands trembled. Her vision blurred, not with tears, but with fury. She hadn't vanished because she was weak. She had left to heal. But Shan had turned her absence into a punchline. She picked up Zion's card. 2 rings, a calm voice. "Zion Malik speaking." Mehar inhaled deeply. "Does the atelier still stand?" There was a pause, then warmth. "It was never locked." Within a week, Meher boarded a private jet bound for Paris. She didn't know what her future looked like, only that it wouldn't be silent anymore. Zion greeted her at the airstrip with a quiet nod and a simple promise: "No one will own your name again." Paris welcomed Meher, not with grand applause, but with quiet potential, the kind that settles in your bones and whispers. This is where it begins again. Zion's atelier wasn't a glossy showroom or some luxury gallery on the Champs-Élysées. It was tucked away in an old perfume factory in La Marais, redesigned into a creative sanctuary. Exposed brick walls, sunlit skylights, vintage mannequins, and a long oak table that held more sketches than champagne glasses. It was raw, real, and perfect. "You'll have your own team if you want one," Zion said on her first day, unlocking the tall glass doors. "But I believe in solitude before storms." Meha smiled faintly. "I'm the storm now." He didn't correct her. In the following weeks, Paris became both her cocoon and her battlefield. The city's heartbeat, the cafes, the architecture, the street performers near the Seine fed her imagination. Her hands moved like they had never stopped. She created not for approval, but from a place of rediscovered self-respect. Days bled into nights as she explored deeper, edgier themes. The soft pastels she once favored were replaced by stormy grays, bleeding golds, and fabrics that moved like secrets being spilled. She infused her designs with structure and softness, chaos and grace, reflecting the war within her and the woman she was becoming. Zion visited often, but never intrusively. He observed more than he spoke. Some days, he'd bring her rare textiles from Morocco or Japan. Other times he'd silently leave strong coffee and almond croissants beside her scattered sketches. He never demanded updates. He respected the process. "You see people," she told him one evening, looking up from her cutting board, "not as investments but as ... possibilities." He leaned against the window frame. "People forget. I was a broken possibility once, too." That night, over wine and candlelight in the atelier's rooftop garden, they traded truths. Zion shared how his first love, his cousin and co-founder, had sold his startup idea to a corporate rival. He'd lost not just his company but his belief in trust. He rebuilt himself from scratch, vowing to never let betrayal steal his kindness. It explained the calm in his voice and the weight in his silences. "I built wealth so no one could ever control me again," he said, staring at the moonlit rooftops. Mahar nodded slowly. "I built silence to protect myself from being erased." They were, in their own ways, survivors, but Mahar didn't want to survive anymore. She wanted to create, to conquer not with bitterness, but with brilliance. Romantic tension simmered between them, undeniable but unspoken. Zion never crossed boundaries. He'd glance at her longer than necessary, stand a little closer, smile a little softer, but never interrupted her focus. And Mahar, though drawn to his gentleness, refused to be distracted. Love was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not yet. She poured everything into her designs, her rage, her hope, her memories. Each piece in her upcoming collection told a story. One gown was titled Silenced Symphony, black velvet with jagged gold seams running down the back, like the spine of a woman stitched back together. Another, Unclaimed Fire, used burnt orange chiffon and fractured beadwork to represent rebirth from destruction. Sleep became secondary. She worked through dawn, her hands blistered, her eyes red but her soul awake. She rejected stylists, refused celebrity endorsements. She wanted her work to speak louder than any influencer. Zion watched from the sidelines, pride flickering in his gaze every time she broke a rule or reinvented a silhouette. He never asked her to tone it down, never urged her to make it marketable. One night, as she stood barefoot on the atelier floor, finalizing the lineup of her debut collection, he entered quietly. "You've changed," he said. She turned to him, sweaty and exhausted, a pin still tucked behind her ear. "I didn't change. I finally arrived." He stepped closer, not touching, but close enough to feel the heat between them. And what a powerful arrival it will be. Their eyes locked. For a brief, dangerous moment, Mahar felt the pull. The comfort of his presence, the quiet reassurance that she wasn't alone anymore. But just as quickly, she stepped back. "I need to finish this," she whispered. He smiled, not offended. "I'll be downstairs." As he turned to leave, she called out, "Zion." He stopped. "Thank you for seeing me before the world remembered." He gave a nod that said more than words ever could. In that moment, Mahar realized something powerful. She wasn't rising because she wanted revenge. She was rising because she was no longer afraid of being seen, that in this time, no one would dare call her forgettable. Paris Fashion Week buzzed with its usual electricity models parading through hotel lobbies, designers sipping espresso with restless fingers, and journalists chasing whispers that could turn into headlines. But this year, amidst the familiar names and returning giants, one name stirred more curiosity than any other. Anonymous designer backed by billionaire Zion Malik joins lineup. No press kits, no backstage access, no confirmed identity. Just one detail leaked by accident or perhaps on purpose. The mysterious label was called Rev. The fashion world, ever hungry for the next disruption, spiraled into speculation. Some guessed it was a marketing stunt by an established brand. Others believed Zion had found a tech genius turned fashion rebel. But no one, not even the most gossip-hungry tabloids, guessed the truth. Ravella was Mahar Connery, born, renamed, and ready. Behind closed atelier doors, Mahar rehearsed the runway choreography, adjusted finishing touches, and coached the models herself. Her collection, titled Resurrected, was a haunting and powerful blend of bold silhouettes, sculptural layers, and deeply intimate textures. It wasn't just fashion, it was therapy. War paint, and resurrection stitched in silk. Meanwhile, across town, Shan Mirza and Alizé were rehearsing their show with full media frenzy. Their new line, Nova Pulse, was loud, extravagant, glitter-drenched, a desperate attempt to stay relevant in a world rapidly evolving. Shan smirked, in interviews, throwing subtle jabs at washed-up designers and teasing no competition this year. He had no idea the storm heading his way. Zion remained behind the scenes at first, honoring Meha's wish for silence, but as Fashion Week's opening gala approached, she knew it was time. "Are you sure?" he asked, watching her zip up a structured wine-red blazer over a matte black sheath. Meha met his eyes in the mirror. "It's time they remember who I am." And with that, they stepped into the light. The pre-event red carpet swarmed with fashion, insiders and influencers. Zion's arrival alone caused cameras to tilt and heads to turn. But when Meha stepped out beside him, graceful and unshaken, the chaos began. Click, click, click. Voices shouted, "Who is she, Zion? New muse. Is that Meha Khan?" The name rippled through the crowd like a forgotten melody suddenly remembered. She didn't flinch. Her posture was steel, her smile unreadable. She wore no flashy labels, no gaudy jewels, just confidence and couture stitched from her soul. Inside the venue, murmurs spread. Journalists scrambled to confirm. Some didn't recognize her at first. She had changed. Sleeker, stronger, with an edge in her eyes that hadn't been there years ago. But the ones who knew her gasped quietly. "That's Meha Khan." Social media exploded within minutes. Hashtags like hashtag return of MEHER, hashtag REVELA unmasked, and hashtag ZAYAN and MEHER trended globally. Suddenly, every seat at her upcoming show was in high demand. Even major editors who had once written her off were begging for last-minute passes. Backstage, Meha kept her calm. She didn't need validation, but she welcomed the reckoning. Across the city, in his hotel suite, Shan watched the headlines with confusion that slowly turned into disbelief. Meha Khan, alive, in Paris, with Zion Malik. He stared at the screen, his fingers tightening around his whiskey glass. Alizé muttered something about bad timing and walked away, but Shan couldn't stop staring. For years he had mocked her absence, used her silence to build his myth. He had paraded Alizé as the future of fashion. Now Meha was walking hand in hand with the most respected investor in the industry. And the press wasn't calling her a relic, they were calling her a revelation. "She won't last," he muttered. Under his breath, "It's just noise," but deep down, he knew it wasn't noise, it was thunder. The day before her show, Meha walked the empty runway with Zion beside her. The venue was stripped down, no excessive props or flashing lights, just a narrow black runway and rows of white chairs. "You nervous?" Zion asked softly. "No," she replied honestly. "I'm ready." He smiled. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know this. What you've created, bigger than revenge. It's art." She looked at him. "This was never for revenge, it was for remembering. For reclaiming my voice." He nodded, then let them listen. And as the spotlights dimmed that evening, the world leaned in, unaware that what they were about to witness wasn't just fashion, it was the return of a woman they had underestimated and would never forget again. The lights dimmed. The audience hushed. A single violin note echoed through the Paris venue like a trembling heartbeat. Then, a spotlight cut through the dark, illuminating the sleek black runway of Ravela's debut. Meha stood backstage, her hands calm, her heart steady. The models lined up in silence, dressed in creations that had taken shape from her pain, her rage, her survival. This was no ordinary fashion show, it was a confession, a declaration, a resurrection in silk and steel. The first model stepped out in shattered bloom, a gown of deep indigo with silver embroidery shaped like broken petals climbing up. The hem then came wounded gold, a structured piece with jagged metallic cuts symbolizing armor reforged after betrayal. Each design told a chapter of Meha's journey, her fall, her silence, and her rebirth. The audience was stunned into silence at first, but as the fourth look glided across the runway, a wave of gasps, followed by thunderous applause, swept the room. This was unlike anything Paris had seen. Sitting in the second row, Shan Mirza felt the blood drain from his face. He couldn't believe what he was witnessing. That's her style, he muttered, brows furrowed. Her soul, whispered a fashion critic beside him. Each dress revealed more than fabric, it revealed Meha's transformation. One design, Mute No More, featured hand-painted calligraphy stitched across sheer panels. spelling out the Uda word for AZAADI-freedom. The crowd rose to their feet by the finale. And then she stepped out, Mahar Khan, in a fitted black ensemble with a blood-red cape trailing behind her. Her hair was slicked back, her eyes lined with defiance. She walked with poise, purpose, and power, pausing only once at the end of the runway to meet the camera's gaze head-on. The applause became deafening. Cameras flashed. Journalists scrambled for quote. Editors clapped with tear-filled eyes. Backstage, Zion watched her with pride that made his chest ache. She didn't walk a runway tonight, whispered one photographer. She walked through fire. Meanwhile, across the aisle, Alizé fidgeted in her seat, dressed in an awkward, over-accessorized outfit from her own upcoming line. She felt invisible. Every eye, every lens, every ounce of energy in the room was focused on Meher. What is she even doing here? She hissed at Shan. This is supposed to be our year. Shan didn't answer because he knew that it was over as Meher made her way. Backstage, a storm of reporters waited outside the venue. She emerged with Zion by her side, fingers gently interlocked. The moment their clasped hands were seen, the crowd surged forward. Mahar, how does it feel to be back? What inspired, resurrected, is Ravella your permanent return? She answered few questions. She didn't need to speak, her work had spoken for her then. One voice pierced the noise. Mr. Mirza, any comments on Meher Khan's comeback? Shan, who had tried to slip away unnoticed, froze. He turned toward the cameras, forced a smirk, and shrugged. She was always decent, but I still think she's forgettable. People love a comeback story. Give it a month. There were a few awkward laughs from junior reporters, then the energy shifted. Because just behind him, Meher and Zion stepped out of the building and the entire media crowd swiveled. Lenses turned. Boom mics followed her. Flashbulbs exploded. In rapid bursts, Shan's words were drowned by the sea of excitement erupting for her. No one even noticed when Alizé tried to approach the photographers. Over here, can I say something? She chirped. They ignored her. The crowd was too busy chasing the woman who had once been broken, erased, ridiculed, and who now stood, radiant in her own glory. Zion turned to Meher as they paused at the steps. You good? She looked out at the screaming fans, the clapping press, and the sea of faces calling her name. I'm whole, she said simply. He smiled. Then, without warning, he leaned in and pressed a soft, reverent kiss to her forehead. Cameras exploded, and then he said, just loud enough for her to hear, they finally see what I saw from the start. Mahar closed her eyes for a heartbeat, letting the moment settle into her skin like the warmth of the sun after a long, brutal winter. She had walked through fire, but she hadn't burned. She had risen. Later that night, Meher stood alone on the balcony of her Paris apartment. The Eiffel Tower sparkled in the distance. She held a glass of red wine, her phone filled with messages, offers, and glowing reviews. Zion joined her in silence, standing beside her as equals. No press tomorrow, she said with a smile. Let's disappear for a day anywhere the world can't follow. He raised his glass to hers, to walking through fire. She clinked her glass, and not letting it consume you. As they stood together under the Paris sky, Meher realized this wasn't just a comeback. It was a beginning. And this time, she was no longer anyone's shadow. She was the flame. By morning, Meher's name was everywhere. Vogue titled her the Phoenix of Paris. BOF, Business of Fashion, called her collection the rebirth of meaning in an industry gasping for soul. Every major outlet from L to WWD dedicated full-length features to her designs, her story, her silence, and her explosive return. Within 24 hours, Ravella was no longer a mystery. Label it was a movement. Clips from the runway trended on every platform. Influencers praised the craftsmanship. Stylists begged to borrow pieces, and top-tier buyers scrambled to get exclusives. Celebrities changed their Fashion Week schedules just to meet Meher. Her inbox was flooded. Her social media, once deactivated for years, now shimmered with followers, millions of them. She had become a global symbol, not just of style, but of resilience. Meanwhile, across town, the fallout hit Shan Mirza like a slow implosion. By the end of the week, two major investors pulled out of his brand. Whispers in the industry questioned his relevance. Fashion critics who once praised his flair now accused him of creative theft and emotional manipulation. A leading journalist tweeted, maybe Meher wasn't forgettable. Maybe she was just never given credit. Then came the final blow. Eliza left him. She didn't say goodbye, just posted a picture with a newer designer, 26-year-old breakout star Rihan Troy, with the caption, onwards and upwards. Shan threw his phone. Across the room, he had once believed he was untouchable. Now, the silence surrounding his name was louder than any headline. At the atelier, Mahar moved through her new reality with grace. Zion entered the design space one morning, holding a velvet folder. "This," he said, "is the contract transferring. Full rights of Revella to you. All shares, all IP, everything." Mahar looked up from her sketchbook. "You already said it was mine. I meant it. But now it's legal. Irrevocable." He placed it gently on the table. "You don't need to sign today." She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the elegant black ink. There it was, her name, Con, sole owner and creative director of Revella. She closed the folder softly. Then she said something that made Zion pause. "I appreciate everything you've done, but I don't want to accept more than what I've earned. Not now. Not like this." He furrowed his brows. "You've earned this more than anyone. I want to build the next chapter myself," she said with steady eyes. "No safety net, no billionaire backer, no crutch. I want the world to know that what's coming next is mine, not a gift, not a favor." Zion didn't argue. Instead, he leaned back, admiration softening his gaze. "You're not just the phoenix of Paris," he said. "You're the architect of your own fire." Mahar smiled, the kind of smile that comes from closure and confidence. "Then let's build the future, not as savior and survivor but as partners." He extended his hand. She shook it, not with the timidity of a rescued soul, but with the firm grasp of an equal. There was no ring, no promise of forever, no romantic flourish, just two people who had walked through ruin, emerged whole, and chose to rise together side by side. In the distance, the Eiffel Tower glimmered like a lighthouse, but Mahar didn't need direction anymore. She was the light. A year had passed. The skyline of Manhattan shimmered in the September dusk. Camera flashes lit the plaza outside Spring Studios. Banners waved high. New York Fashion Week featuring global icon Mahar Khan. Inside the air buzzed. Editors from Vogue, Harper's Bazaar and Elle waited in the front row, fanning themselves with VIP passes. A-list celebrities adjusted their sunglasses beneath indoor lighting. Fashion influencers whispered excitedly, clutching their phones, ready to go live. Backstage, Mahar moved with graceful control. No longer the woman hiding in sketches and shadows, she now stood at the helm of a creative empire. Her collection Vastawas Moments from launch. Inspired by journeys of reclaiming space and identity, it combined raw silks with metallic threadwork, earthy tones with celestial blues. Her staff, mostly young female designers from around the globe, scurried about with nerves and pride. For many of them, this was their first runway, and they were being led by her. Mahar's foundation, Stitch Her, had sponsored 20 scholarships that year alone, launching young women into design programs, internships, and ateliers across Paris, Mumbai, Nairobi and Sao Paulo. Her vision wasn't just to create fashion, it was to create legacy. She looked into a mirror, adjusting a simple gold bracelet. Behind her, a young assistant peeked in. "Miss Mahar, final countdown. 10 minutes, she nodded with a calm smile. "Tell them to breathe. We've already won." Somewhere across the city, in a cramped studio apartment, Shan Mirza stared at a live stream on his aging tablet. His once glamorous apartment had been sold to cover debts. His label had folded months ago. She was now engaged to a Hollywood costume designer and hadn't returned a single message. He watched in silence as Mahar's logo flashed on screen. There she was, dressed in a structured ivory blazer over silk pants, her hair in a sleek braid. She walked onto the runway not as a model, but as a commander of her domain. The crowd rose in a standing ovation before the show even began. Shan paused the feed. He couldn't bear it. He rewound it and watched again, and again. Each time, the applause rang louder in his hollow room. He once called her forgettable. Now, even Google corrected his name when paired with hers. Backstage, the show ended in rapturous applause. As models returned to the dressing area, crying with joy, hugging Mahar, a quiet presence entered through a side door. Zion Malik. He wore a simple charcoal suit, no security entourage, no announcement. Just a soft smile and a small velvet box in his hand. Mahar looked up and laughed gently. "You're early. The after party hasn't even started. I'm not here for the party." He opened the box not with a dramatic flourish, but with sincerity. Inside wasn't a diamond ring, that it was a key. She looked up at him, curious. He grinned boyishly. "It's to a studio I built on that island we visited in Greece. Remember, the olive trees, the open sea." Mahar laughed, touched. "I said it was too quiet to live in." "Exactly," he said, stepping closer. "It's not for living. It's for dreaming, creating, escaping when the world becomes too loud." Tears shimmered at the corners of her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. You always know what I need before I ask, she whispered. I just listen, he replied softly. And I see you. They didn't need to kiss to seal the moment. They didn't need a proposal. They already had a bond forged in fire, healing, and ambition. It was a love grounded in equality. Around them, the lights dimmed. The music from the runway echoed one final time. He called her forgettable. The world, however, remembered her forever.